not long after the album Clancy came out, a year ago now, I did a full album review of that body of work, including a breakdown by song. But that was a while ago now, and it was very soon after the album itself had come out, so I hadn't really had time to fully process or unpack the album in its fullness. Now, a year later, I am sure some of my opinions and takes on this album have changed, so I thought it would be worthwhile to go through and give a new ranking of the album in its entirety. Now, before we start actually ranking these, 2 points of clarification need to be made. One, because there are so few songs in this ranking, in this tier list, there are only 14 because it's just one album that we're looking at. I only want there to be one song in the S tier at the end. One song which is, in my estimation, the best song or my favorite song off of Clancy. And then the second point of clarification is because of that, because we are just looking at one album and only one song is going to make it into the S tier, there will be some songs which will be in the B, C, or even D tiers. And that's not because, in my estimation, these songs are bad songs, but when taking a look at these 14 songs and ranking them from my favorite to my least favorite, something is going to have to end up as my least favorite, naturally speaking. But with those disclaimers out of the way, let's get into it. Let's look at these songs, starting with Overcompensate. To start off, I'm going to put this in an A tier. It is one of my favorites off of the album. It's very well done. I'm particularly fond of the way in which it opens, bringing back those lines and the melody from the song Bandito. And obviously, it works perfectly as an introduction to the album Clancy, setting the tone, as I mentioned a moment ago, saying the tone and the sound which this album and this era were ushering in. It's not quite S tier, at least not yet, perhaps when taken in consideration with everything else. Eventually, I will move it up there. There are a couple of minor points which I take issue with in the sound of the song, and some of the lyricism, while very good, is not always my favorite. But overall, this is a very good song. Next up, Next Semester. I'm going to start off with this in a B, but I may move it higher. I do very much like this song. Not as much as Overcompensate, and I do find bits of it a little repetitive, but the melody in it is very, very good. And I also really like the bridge of this song, which interestingly is not in the official lyrical booklet for the album. I think online, obviously, you can find those lyrics for that bridge, but for some reason they just aren't officially released in the physical releases, the CD or the vinyl. But I do really like the lyricism in this one, especially, like I mentioned, in that bridge and towards kind of the second half of the song. I think it's my favorite. Not because the song is coming to an end at last, but just where Tyler took that song throughout as it progresses into that second half. I really like with that bridge and then the slowed down bit as well. Backslide, a C. I think of the four which were released, the 4 songs which were released before the album as a whole was published, Backslide was my least favorite. Now, it has grown on me quite a lot. And again, I wouldn't be surprised if I move this up a bit higher later on. But to start, this will have to go down in a C. The lyricism is good. The melody is not bad. The way the melody works in the chorus always just kind of hits my ear a little strangely. The more I listen to it, the more I realize it's not actually bad. It just isn't quite a method of delivering that melody, which I particularly enjoy. The pacing and the tempo of it aren't quite my favorite either with that one, but some parts of it are really well done. Just not one of my favorite songs off of the album. The Craving single version, that was the 4th one that they released. I think I'll put it just above Backslide for now. Yeah, actually, I'll put it there. I'll put it in at the bottom of the B. I do really like it. It sounds like a single. At the time the album came out, and we'll get into this more in a moment when we look at Jenna's version, I really thought that they should have released the single version on the album and had Jenna's version be the alternate version that was released separate from the album. And I still might be inclined to agree with that, but the more that I've listened to these songs, the more I've recognized that the single version really does sound like it's a single more than an album track. I'm not sure I can fully explain what I mean by that. It's just something in the melody and the production, I think, of that song. So I think they made the right decision in the end. Now, that's not to say I don't think Jenna's version should be improved upon, but again, we'll get into that in a moment when we get to that song. So I think low B is fine for this one. Things, obviously will be moving around as we include more songs, but I do like it. I think it's, there's always a song on these albums ever since Blurry Face, which he has included for Jenna. And I think this is lyrically my favorite. Formidable was good, and Smithereens was good as well. But there's something about the lyricism and the message of The Craving that I found to be more relatable, a bit of a deeper song when it came to writing a song for Jenna. Not that the other songs were shallow per se, but I think if you look from Tear in My Heart all the way up to The Craving, you can see a natural progression in depth and maturity in how these songs are written and how they focus on different, aspects and elements of his relationship with Jenna. And that's something I've appreciated kind of watching. And so I think I might like Smithereens more than Formidable, perhaps. But generally speaking, my appreciation and my like of these songs for Jenna has grown over time with each new one. So if there is one on Breach, that would be cool. I'd be curious to see how that one is. But I also wouldn't be surprised if there wasn't one included on that album, just given the nature of what that album is and the story that it's supposed to be telling, at least from what we can tell so far. Next up, Midwest Indigo. Now this is one which really has grown on me over time. I believe, although I may be misremembering this, that when I did that initial review of Clancy, Midwest Indigo was one which I held to be my least favorite, or one of my least favorites on the album. I wouldn't say it's one of my favorites, obviously. It's only in a B. But it is one which I really enjoy listening to. I think the melody of that song and the tempo and the beat and all of that have really grown on me in a way I didn't expect. At first, I thought it sounded kind of just like a typical pop rock song. And melodically speaking, in many ways, it is similar to something like that. But the lyrics are actually deeper than I think they come across initially. And it has a really fun melody. And I enjoy listening to it. And I, for some reason, thought I was going to find it too boring or too bland. And that really has not been the case. So that was kind of a surprise and definitely something which has changed for me over this past year. Routines in the Night. I'm going to start off with this in S. Probably will move that down to A as we go along. It might surprise some people that I'm putting it above Overcompensate, and I might switch those around. They are quite close. But Routines in the Night was instantly one of my favorite songs the first time I heard it. Lyrically, I really like it. It may be one of my favorites. Probably not my favorite lyrically off the album. At least my second favorite. Musically, I also really like it. I'm surprised they didn't release it as a single initially. Obviously, it got some traction after the album came out, and they played it at a couple of talk shows and things like that, as well as, it was playing on the radio more and things along those lines. The melody of it is wonderful, especially that pre-chorus. That's just a great song overall, and the music video for it is really good as well. But obviously, that's not part of this ranking here, but that is something which I really enjoyed and appreciated about it. And is worth mentioning because the first time I heard the song, I was also watching the music video for it because it was part of the official release live stream that 21pilots did the night Clancy came out, which was showcasing all of the music videos which they had made as well. So, Vignette. I like this one more than I think some people do. I'm going to put it in A for now. I might move Routines down into A as well. That might end up bumping Vignette. I don't know. I do like Routines better than Vignette, but I do really like Vignette. In many ways, perhaps it's the simplicity of it, the more, just a simpler beat, simpler sound to it than something like Routines in the Night or Overcompensate. It reminds me of some earlier 21pilots stuff, perhaps something that would fit well on Blurry Face or Trench. I think my biggest complaint with the song is that it takes a considerable amount of time to start and isn't a terribly long song. I think if it had an intro of the same length, but was a longer song than it is and made up for that proportionately, I would like it better. But it feels like the song takes a bit of time to actually start, and then it's a really short song once it does start. But other than that, I like the sound, like the lyricism. I think it's well done. The Craving, Jenna's version. I think I'm going to put this in D. And I think it's important to clarify, I do not dislike this song. In fact, I like it a lot. But because it is so stripped down and almost just entirely acoustic, it is less impressive to me than the others. And it's hard to say that it is better than any of these other songs, which at least feel like there was a lot more work put into them. Now, it's not to discredit just the songwriting process and ability that went into writing The Craving in the first place, obviously. But besides the fact that it's not the one that I listen to the most, although I always enjoy and appreciate it when I do hear it, it isn't one which kind of stands as an impressive, really well done song. And again, the melody is good, but it's not my favorite. Even just going off a melody alone, it would probably be quite low in that aspect also. I think there's also an aspect in which it feels a little out of place on Clancy, partly because it does seem so stripped down. Now I understand it comes right in the middle of the album, kind of shifts and slows the pace for a moment there. It gives you a break from the intensity of the rest of the album, and that's worth something. But I do think this would have fared better as kind of an alternate version of The Craving. And perhaps the single version of The Craving could have been reworked in such a way that it didn't sound so much like a single and fit better on the rest of Clancy alongside the rest of those songs. And then this version, Jenna's version, could exist as the alternate version released after, or maybe even just before, the rest of the album came out. Lavish, I'm also going to put in the D, above Jenna's version of The Craving. It again, in sound, feels kind of out of place on Clancy. Lyrically, it's not one of my favorites. Melodically, it's not one of my favorites. It's good. I appreciate it. I understand what they're going for with that, and I think that's good, and that's fair, and that's fine. Just not my cup of tea. And perhaps it was just a song that they wanted to write in order to have fun writing a song together. That's fine. And it's not bad. But it kind of, in my estimation, pales in comparison when taken in consideration alongside the rest of these songs. All right, Navigating. This will go up into the S tier. I think I'll put it just above Routines of the Night, which means I should move this down to the A tier. It is, at least right now, the song off of Clancy which I listen to the most, and therefore I believe it is my favorite. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean it's the one which I think is the best. And even when considering the song that is the best, there is still a level of subjectivity which I am taking into consideration there. But the difference between my favorite and the song which I believe to be the best, even if I can't speak to an objectively best song off of this album, is that Navigating is the song which is my favorite right now and I listen to the most. But if there could only be one song off of Clancy, only one song to exist, and all the others had to be deleted forever, and no one could ever listen to them again, or I at least could never listen to them again, I don't know if Navigating is the one which I would keep. Because while I am a big fan of it right now, I acknowledge that I may grow tired of it over time. And there may be other songs on this album which are richer and have greater depth, both musically and lyrically, than Navigating does. Not that it lacks either of those, but just it may be lacking in comparison. All that is to say, I hesitate to consider it the best, but it is my favorite right now. And then we have Snapback. This one I feel like, at least for me, kind of gets forgotten sometimes. It seems like the companion piece to Backslide, and because it was released on the album and not as a single, and because it comes later on the track list than Backslide does, I think it seems to copy and repeat what Backslide is already doing. Now, obviously, it does say more in and of itself, and it isn't something that can't stand alone without Backslide, or vice versa. And I actually don't think it's fair to say that it does mimic, copy, or repeat Backslide. It plays along similar lines, and it deals in similar themes, but I think it is something in its own right, regardless, and it is saying something unique and different to Backslide in many ways. So I don't think it's fair to say that it should be sort of forgotten and lumped in as kind of the follow-up to Backslide rather than a song in and of itself. That said, I do think I like it a little bit less than Backslide, but I do really like it. I think it's a bit simpler and perhaps a bit blander than some of the other songs on the album, which I find that I like or appreciate more than Snapback. Oldie Station. I'm going to put that definitely in B. I think I'll put it... this is hard. Oldie Station and Next Semester are close for me. I like both of them for different reasons, and they're obviously very different songs. But I do really like Oldie Station. For now, I'll put it just above Next Semester, but they're kind of neck to neck for me. So it's a little hard to demonstrate that on a tier list like this. I think Oldie Station does what I wished The Craving could have done in terms of sound, right? It's a bit more laid back, a bit simpler, a bit more of a ukulele song. But it does it really well. It has simple but nice and well-made production. And it doesn't sound as empty and just completely stripped back as Jenna's version of The Craving does. And I think if that version of The Craving had been more along the lines of what they did with Oldie Station, I think it would have fit on Clancy better. Now, I'm not saying they should have copied Oldie Station, used those same melodies, or even used the same sounds or anything, just playing different notes. But I think that style, using that as an example, might have made me appreciate Jenna's version of The Craving more. All right, we are coming to the end of walking through this album with At the Risk of Feeling Dumb. This one was instantly one of my favorites off the album. And as time has gone on, I have listened to it less than I did in the first few weeks after Clancy was released, but I think it will always be one of my favorites. The sound is wonderful. The production is incredible. It's very well done. Every time you listen to it, you hear some new sound playing somewhere in the background, coming in one of your ears or the other. There's so much going on in the song. It's produced so well. It all flows together very, very nicely. I think they mentioned when they released all of these in that live stream that there were something like 25 different versions of the song in the end that they worked on with Paul Meany. So it was worth it. It paid off in the end. Yeah, it's incredible. I think in some ways I might have gone in a different direction. I might not have made certain parts of it as heavy as they are. I think it works in the end better than not doing that. But I'm personally not as much of a fan of like the distorted guitar coming in and things like that. But again, if it all was purely just kind of the same style, it wouldn't necessarily feel like a 21 Pilots song, and it also, I think, would get boring as well. And so they managed to not let that happen. And lyrically, it's great. It has a great message. So that helps as well. I think I'll put it above Vignette and not quite above Overcompensate. All right, finally, the last song on the album, Paladin Strait. And for this one, I think I'm going to have to rearrange some things a little bit. Move Vignette down to B. Move the single version of The Craving down to C. Move Navigating to the top of A above Routines in the Night. And with that, slip Paladin Strait into the S tier. I mentioned earlier when we were talking about navigating that there's a difference between my favorite song to listen to right now and the song which I consider to be the best song off of this album. And I think I can say that Paladin Strait is the song which I believe to be the best song on Clancy. Musically, it's incredible. It's very well done. It's very long, and it's sort of somber, but it's very well done. It's beautifully sung. It's beautifully written. The lyrics are incredible. And of course, the twist at the end and all of that is great as well. But even taken aside from that, even if you cut that part out, it is a fantastic piece of music. And one of the best songs I think they've written ever. If you're hearing me say that and you think that's a crazy take, it might help you to understand that Bandito is one of the songs which I think is one of their best songs also. It's certainly one of the best songs off of Trench. I think there's something about not just a slower song, but a very beautifully, hauntingly beautiful, slower song written by Tyler Joseph that it's really hard to beat. Bandito does it very well, and a Paladin Strait follows in that same kind of style, but potentially even surpasses it. It's very different, right, lyrically and thematically to Bandito, but it is similarly incredible. And often songs like Bandito and Paladin Strait get overlooked. Obviously, Paladin Strait has been significant because of how it ended in the music video which accompanied it. But Bandito often doesn't really get the praise and recognition which I believe it deserves, or the discussion which should be surrounding it, because there's a lot to unpack there lyrically, and it's also just a great song to listen to as well. So I'm really hoping on Breach they have a song which follows in that vein. The closest thing that they had on Skilled and Icy was Redecorate, and that is one of my favorites off of Skilled and Icy as well. But even that one didn't quite do what Bandito or Paladin Strait does. I think it's also something about, Tyler having the inspiration and having such a deep and thorough song to work on and write and work through that it becomes a really long song. Bandito and Paladin Strait are some of the longest songs which they have published, and they're not unnecessarily long. They are necessarily long, and I think that speaks to how profound those songs are.